Hi there, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion. I'm Tim Cross. I write about science and technology for The Economist magazine, and I've got a panel here to discuss quantum technology and quantum computing and its impact on online security, which I think is probably the single biggest thing or this is the first thing that comes to people's minds when they hear about quantum computing. So I'm joined by, and I'll do this in alphabetical order, Dr. Itan Barmes, who works in the quantum cyber risk services at Deloitte, advising companies on the benefits and risks of quantum computing. We've got Peter Bordow, who's a senior vice president at Wells Fargo, in charge of quantum cryptography and emerging technology. We've got Dr. Chen, who works at the National Institute of Standards and Technology in America, which is even now testing out new kinds of mathematics and algorithms that might be able to stand up to quantum computers in the future. And we've got Dr. Ali El Kaafarani, who's the chief executive and the co-founder of PQShield, which is a company based in Oxford, which designs hardware and software that's intended to stay secure in a world with quantum computers in it. And I think because this is quite a sort of technical and tricky topic, I think it's worth spending a little bit of time just sort of laying some groundwork. So, Lily, could I ask you just in a few words and sort of reasonably simply, could you just explain what exactly a quantum computer is and how it's different from the sort of ordinary computers that people will be watching this debate on?
Hello. I'm not a quantum expert. However, from my work, I need to understand the difference about their impact to the public key cryptography we have used since 1980s for internet security, for cyber security, for trusted platform. Because most of the public key cryptography is based on the hard problems. So here there are differences about how hard it is and respect to which kind of computing technologies. Currently, what we use in public key cryptography is based on the integer factorization or discrete logarithms. These problems are hard for the classical computers, but because of the Peter Shor's work, these problems are not hard for quantum computers. As a result, the current well-deployed public key cryptography in every internet routers, laptops, computers, servers, smartphones, and even in some automobile communications will not be secure anymore. We need to find new solutions. However, fortunately, we can find some hard problems, both hard for the classical computers and the quantum computers. So based on these hard problems, such as the shortest vector problems in the lattice, we can design new crypto systems which are secure for both classical computers and quantum computers. This category is called post-quantum cryptography.
Great, thank you. So that's a nice overview of the size of the problem. If I can just sort of drill down a little bit, Peter, could you maybe tell us a bit? Lily mentioned cryptography there. What exactly is cryptography used for on the internet, and why are people worried about what quantum computers might do to it? Could you just paint a quick picture?
Sure, Tim, thanks. Well, cryptography refers to the, without using the same word, encryption or the securing of transactional data across two endpoints, A to B. And currently our cryptography that we use, we call legacy cryptography, has been fairly robust and fairly effective. But because of the way quantum computers work, as Lily mentioned, the mathematical basis for protecting that data payload is at risk of being compromised by quantum computers because of the way they work in a non-binary fashion. And so I like to refer to this as sort of a Y2K level problem without the luxury of an end date. So really, there's a lot of moving pieces here. There's the development of quantum platforms. There's the development of quantum resistant or quantum resilient algorithms, and all of the infrastructure worldwide that's really affected by this. And I think people are concerned because it transcends the financial sector. It transcends the domestic concerns in the US. This is a global problem across all industries, essentially for all people.
Great. And Ali, could you? So this is something that if you've been paying attention to quantum computing, we've heard about the sort of coming crypto apocalypse for years and years. Lily mentioned, the theoretical work on this was first done in the 90s. How imminent do you think this is? Could you give us a sense of what the state of the art is in the field, and when are we going to need to start worrying about this?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. In security, when you ask this question, when do you need to worry about something in particular, is really you start worrying about it when you don't know when it's going to happen. It's not like when you know when you know when it's going to happen, it's too late already. So when you don't know when it's going to happen, this is the worrying part, and this is where we are exactly now. So we know that huge progress and advancement is being done in quantum computing, right? Quantum computing is the field of using quantum mechanics to build a fully functioning quantum computer. We know this is happening now. We know that we are in the middle of this amazing phase of actually building a quantum computer. When is it going to be the first quantum computer that can break public key cryptography that Lily was talking about? Is something that we don't know of, and that is why NSA and followed by NIST started the process of finding alternatives to the public key crypto systems that we're using now, so that we start migrating to what we call quantum safe or quantum resistant encryption and or public key crypto systems as soon as possible. So that's the way to mitigate against a threat that you don't know when it's going to materialize, but you kind of like know that you are heading into this in this direction.
Thanks, Ali. And I guess that goes back to Peter's point about this is like a Y2K problem without the security of having a specific date. Peter, you wanted to come back on that, I think.
Yeah, so that was a great explanation. Just to dovetail onto that, one of the things that's really emerging as a clear and present risk is what we call harvest now, decrypt later. And in this model, bad actors are now harvesting data that's encrypted that they cannot access in anticipation of being able to access that at a future date, right? So the problem is real and it's now. It's not just some timeline in the future, right? So the concern is immediate.
Thanks, Peter. And Itan, following up a bit on what Peter just said, I was going to ask you, do you get clients coming to you asking about this? Is this something that's sort of penetrated out there into business, or is this still a point that you're having to make to them?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. It's a good question, and it's something that we see a big shift happening these days. I would say in the past maybe year or two. Quantum computing is getting a lot of attention lately for various reasons, not necessarily the security aspect. And not also, so for example, the quantum supremacy experiment from Google a couple of years ago, there were a lot of press releases right after it that said, oh, now encryption is in danger because we have quantum supremacy, which is obviously not true because the machine that did quantum supremacy is far from being able to break cryptography. But you see that also creates more attention to the cybersecurity aspect of quantum computing. So absolutely, yes, there is an increasing level of attention to this. We talk to a lot of clients about this. In my life, it's more or less everything that I'm doing. So it's an increasing attention. Still, there is a long way to go.
Okay, so a long way to go. Peter, if I can just come back to something that you said, this idea of harvesting data now and storing it so you can encrypt it later. You mentioned bad actors. who should we think of those bad actors as being? Are we talking, script kiddies and hackers in basements here? Are we talking nation states? Are we talking something in between? Who's going to have access to these things when they do finally arrive?
Well, that's a great question. I think the general consensus is we're talking about bad actor nations primarily. Remember that to develop the resources to create a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, that's pretty significant, right? In money, time, expertise, and so on. This is not something that someone can wire wrap and solder in their basement, right? This is a pretty ambitious endeavor. So I think primarily we're looking at bad actor nation states or those entities that are sponsored by and supported by bad actor nations.
Okay, so if those are the attackers, and maybe Ali, this is one for you. Who should think of themselves as a defender in this? Because you might say, well, a nation state is probably not that interested in me personally. They might be interested in my bank. They're probably interested in my government. Who exactly needs to be worrying about this? If I can put it that way.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, let me try to explain. Like, cryptography now is not something that only military or governments make use of. Cryptography is what makes us able to replicate what we used to have before, um, uh, shifting to a digital life, right? So, in terms of um, communicating confidential data with people, in terms of proving integrity of data, in terms of proving authenticity. So, which is what we call the CIA triangle, like confidentiality, integrity, authenticity. And if you think about it, if you look at how our lives turned into fully digital lives, cryptography is being used everywhere to provide those guarantees, security guarantees for us to have any meaningful guarantee to use digital lives, right? To be digital, right? So it's not only governments who need to worry about. It's not only military. It's really anything that to do with communications over the internet, anything to do with and when you talk about this, like you're probably covering every single use case, right? When you talk about this, so regardless of who the bad actors are, if you talk about best practice in security, if you know of a potential attack on a main part of the cybersecurity infrastructure, we're speaking about public key cryptography, then best practice means we need to shift from a vulnerable and weak cryptography systems to crypto systems that are not that we don't know of any vulnerabilities against, and we don't know of any weakness for those crypto systems, and that's why it's important to stress on. I mean, there will be early adopters, there will be early movers, and people who will follow, but it is a problem that will affect literally everyone. Now, not talking about end users will not have action to take. Someone who's holding a bank card, or someone who has a mobile phone, or someone who has a car key or a sensor at home or a camera. As you can tell, they will need to be provided with new hardware and software that will make sure that the data that they're exchanging over those devices stay secure for decades to come, and not only for 5 years, given the main attack that we know of, which is what Peter mentioned: harvest now and decrypt later.
Great. Okay. Well, and Lily, just to follow up that point, Ali said it isn't end users necessarily that will need to make the running on this, and he talked about replacing the current infrastructure with infrastructure that is resistant to quantum computers. This is what, as I understand it, NIST is trying to do at the moment. Could you give us an overview of NIST's role in this and the kind of new approaches, the new mathematics that you're looking at to try and protect everyone from these machines?
This is a very good opportunity to let everyone know when and how we are going to make the transition to the quantum resistant cryptography, which is also called post-quantum cryptography. So today, as everyone said, the cryptography has been used everywhere, right? It is the cornerstone for the cybersecurity. So NIST has about 50 years history in developing cryptographic standards since 1970s. So we kind of started to work on the post-quantum cryptography standards since 2016 because this is has been a very active research area since 2000, and a lot of new algorithms have been proposed in the research area. However, in order to implement everything to the infrastructure, to the end device, we need standards. So NIST has taken this leadership since 2016, and after the first call for submissions, we received 82 submissions worldwide, and from 25 different countries and in six continents. So this is a community effort. So NIST just lead this effort, evaluation, analysis, and test in the current internet protocols. So after the 5 years, we kind of narrowed down twice. We plan to have our draft standards for public comments in 2023 and then publish the standard to 2024. At the same time, NIST also initiated a project called Migration to Post-Quantum Cryptography. So that was initiated to work with industry partners to make to prepare for this migration, to see how these post-quantum cryptography algorithms work with server, with smartphone, with laptop, with different kind of bandwidths, the wired or wireless, different kind of bandwidths, different kind of protocols, to look into the limitations and some adoption barriers. So we hope we can have a smooth transition. One thing I want to mention, because with the cryptography today is beyond encryption. So when you download a piece of software to your smartphone or application, the code is signed by digital signatures. So the post-quantum cryptography also include quantum resistant signatures to protect your smartphone from malware or malicious software attacks. From that point of view, this is everyone's concern, and to the whole country, national security, and also everybody's privacy. So that's why we think it's very urgent to develop the post-quantum cryptography standards.
Thanks, Lily. And so that was a very nice overview of the process and the sort of theory. It sounds like we have some candidate replacements for the cryptography we use at the moment. But just going back to Peter's Y2K analogy, there's a big difference, of course, between theory and practice, and saying all we need to do is replace all the encryption used by all the devices that connect to the internet. It sounds simple in theory. Maybe, Peter, could you just talk about, try and give people a sense of the scale of that problem? Do you think it's something? Is this a job that can ever be finished? Is it actually doable to update all these billions of devices?
Wow, that's a huge question. Yeah, it is doable, it's not easy. And so, like, let's differentiate between simple and easy, right? Just because something is simple doesn't make it easy to execute on. So in large organizations, typically cryptography exists in different layers in the technology stack, right? From infrastructure all the way up through applications. And so this is not just a simple lift and shift of a couple devices here or there. This can be a very complex migration scheme. And then, I also want to point out, this is really not a one and done thing, right? So once cryptographically relevant machines come online, there's going to be continual evolution in algorithms and in hardware development. And so, me personally, I think there's a lot that we still don't know about what these eventual risks are, right? This is not like a light switch. You flip it on and you're all done. You don't ever have to worry again. This is going to be an ongoing problem. And really, that leads us into sort of the crypto agility conversation of creating a more nimble infrastructure, a more nimble tech stack, so that when new threats appear, we don't have to go through all of the complexity and disruption that we anticipate going through for this series.
Itan, I think you wanted to jump in there.
Yes, there is another aspect that is important to realize here. Cryptography is kind of a commodity. It's being used in different places in the organization. And what we see when we talk to clients is it's not centrally managed. And now we have a transition that we need to take all cryptography across the organization and switch. So the question is also, who's responsible for this? How do you create a project that is so big? Who needs to lead it? Who needs to find where cryptography is in the organization? When we talk about cryptography, usually you have a PKI team, public key infrastructure, creating digital certificates. You have infrastructure, as Peter said. You have developers that write software that needs cryptography, and all these different aspects. Even if we had solutions now, if NIST was done with the standardization process and it would go to regulation and everything was done, to undergo this transition is a very long project. So what I want to say is that a lot of people are waiting for NIST to be ready with the algorithms that we can use today, but that's not the starting point. The starting point is today, when we start defining this project, also from a governance perspective, not just the technical aspect. And even if we start today, then we will still have a lot of work to do, even when NIST is done with the standardization process. So just to realize, it's not just a technical issue, it's also the governance perspective is also very important.
Peter, I think you wanted to come back on that.
Yeah, so I'm building upon what we've just said. So the problem extends not just within an enterprise, but in all of the external communications. So in SaaS providers, third-party technology providers. So it's not just handling your own infrastructure, but it's also coordinating with all of your vendors, your SaaS providers. So it's really a web-like problem that extends from your organization outward.
Great, and I think that kind of nicely illustrates this concept of sort of security being a chain and only sort of as strong as its weakest link. On that, one thing that I sometimes wonder and that people have raised to me is that with the cryptography we have so far, with the cryptography we have today, we're pretty sure that the maths that underlines it is a pretty strong link. The maths have been out there for 40 years. They've been kind of battle tested. There's obviously been huge incentives for people to try and find sort of shortcuts that would let them break existing cryptography, and no one's managed to. How sure can we be, assuming that we can make the big switch, that this new maths that we're going to build our security infrastructure on, how can we be sure that that's as sort of strong and robust as the old sort, and that 10 years down the line we won't find some sort of algorithmic shortcut that kind of blows the whole thing up? And maybe Ali, that might be one for you.
Sure. That's a very good question. And if I recall correctly, Peter was talking about like an ongoing process of it's not going to be like, we have a quantum computer now, and then we're using post-quantum, and it's all sorted. So security and cryptography is an ongoing race between cryptographers and cryptanalysts, right? Those who are building crypto systems and those who are trying to destroy or to break those crypto systems, and they are both needed for better security, for better cryptography. So we can't be sure that certain crypto systems are secure without the effort that cryptanalysts are putting into this field. So you're talking about how old the math behind RSA, for instance, or existing public key cryptography and post-quantum cryptography. And I can tell you that some of the schemes that Lily and her colleagues have been looking at as submissions are just as old as RSA, and Macaulay is an example of code-based cryptography. So the math that we're looking at is not like a 5-year-old math that we just invented now for the process, for NIST process, and to standardize alternatives. So the math is pretty old, but this does not solve the problem. This does not say that we have 100% confidence in any crypto system. Same applies for RSA and existing public key cryptography, right? What RSA proposed as parameters, security parameters, when RSA was invented and were thought to be secure forever, by 1990s, we're not secure anymore, and people were not using those security parameters. And this is what Peter was actually hinting at. So we are confident about the math that we're using now because of the crypto community effort that has been led by NIST, because it's not one particular company that came up with a very smart algorithm that they don't want to share with anyone else, but they think it's the best and it's secure. That's not how cryptography works. We have confidence in it because every cryptographer worldwide has been looking at the submissions that are, that NIST is looking at now, and nobody managed to find attacks on the schemes that will be announced as a result, as an outcome of this process. Some schemes were broken on along the way, but that's the main reason why we're having this process, to rule out the weak schemes and the weak implementations, and to keep only the ones that we believe in. NIST is going to announce this shortly, and they will put a draft, as Lily said, next year, and then the actual standards the year after. But that's not the end of the process. That's the beginning of the post-quantum cryptography journey, where we will keep looking at the what's happening in the cryptanalysis field and how we're going to make the schemes more secure, how we're going to come up with even newer schemes or other schemes.
And Peter, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, that was really great. And I just want to tack on to that. Let's keep in mind that today there are no operating quantum computers that are capable of breaking RSA encryption as we know it, right? And so all of the work and all the concern and all of this conversation is pretty much all academic, and it's based on a lot of mathematical proofs, and it's based on a lot of science. When cryptographically relevant quantum computers become available and they're real and people are working on them and they're using them, we have no idea about the development of algorithms that will occur once we have those platforms in place. I mean, think about it. In the 80s, when digital computers, binary computers, first came on the scene, there were maybe hundreds of applications and algorithms. And now, 40 years later today, you'd be hard pressed to count the number of algorithms and applications and software that are available for binary computers. And I think we can reasonably expect the same sort of paradigm. Once these machines are available and we've got information professionals working on these machines, we'll come up with things that we can't even fathom today.
So it's almost like we're trying to peer into the future, but the past suggests we can only see so far. And that brings me to another question that sort of sometimes comes up. We've talked about post-quantum cryptography as one way to address this problem. People sometimes ask, well, there's another way, isn't there? We can use the principles of quantum mechanics to build networks that, in theory at least, are secure, and we can do all our key distribution across networks that sort of exploit quantum mechanics to make sure that nobody's listening in. In other words, we can use quantum technology to secure our networks against quantum computers. Ali, could you maybe just give us a quick overview of this? It's something that there's been a lot of research into. We see it. I remember when it was news where you could build one of these networks across a river, and now they're talking about doing them across thousands and thousands of kilometers. China, I think in particular, is putting a lot of money into this. How does this kind of fit into this conversation?
Right. Yeah. So you're talking about how one could use quantum technologies to build security products, basically. Yeah. And if those security products are good alternatives to what we're currently using based on mathematics. And the most popular one that people usually use in comparison with post-quantum cryptography is quantum key distribution. So briefly speaking, and not being a quantum physicist myself as well, when it comes to quantum key distribution, as the name suggests, you will have two quantum devices that will be talking to each other, sending random bits from one endpoint to the other endpoint. And those random bits will be used as a seed for a cryptographic key to encrypt further communications between these two devices at a very high level. Few points on this technology. One, it is device dependent. So the algorithms that they use are dependent on those devices that we're talking about, which is not the case for public key cryptography that we're, post-quantum that we're talking about and math-based. The second one, as I mentioned to you, and Lily also talked about, for cryptography, like when we talk about cryptography now, it's really not only encryption. There are, other aspects to cryptography, and that's why I mentioned confidentiality, authenticity, and integrity. And this mechanism of sharing a series of random bits does not provide any authentication mechanism. So when we talk about key exchange protocols, math-based ones, in practice we talk about authenticated key exchange protocols. Otherwise, it doesn't matter if me and Peter are sharing, trying to share random bits and aiming to use them as cryptographic keys to encrypt our communications. If you, Tim, can sit in between and pretend to be, Ali to Peter and Peter to Ali, and just eavesdrop in the middle. So unfortunately, this is not possible by to do using quantum technology. So you have to find a way around it. And one of the ways that they use is that you have a seed, a pre-seed or a pre-shared key inside those two devices, which is in a way, contradicts the whole point of not sharing keys, not assuming that these guys know each other or they have shared keys and they are actually talking to each other for the first time, but still they can actually make sure they are talking to one another, which is basically what public key cryptography manages. So it is device dependent, and it does not provide authentication mechanism, and therefore you will need to, if you don't want to use this pre-shared key because this does not scale at all, right? You will have to use post-quantum cryptography, in particular digital signatures, to be able to authenticate for one to authenticate themselves to the other party. So that's basically when it comes to quantum key distribution, the situation of it.
So Itan, I think you wanted to come back on that, and then Peter.
Yes, there is an ongoing debate in the community about QKD versus post-quantum cryptography, and already some years ago it was a very heated debate. Is it the one or the other? And I think things are changing now, and people realize, like Ali said, not all use cases for public key cryptography can be done with QKD. That is a fact. It's very specific for communication. It has some advantages over PQC when it comes to communication, but for example, it doesn't do digital signatures at all. So I think as a community, we need to move away from this kind of debate. Is it the one or the other? And we need to go to look at specific use cases before we choose the technology and understand the problem better, and then choose the right technology. So, people envision situations where, think about layers of defense. So to have different multiple solutions. If you have certain disadvantages, for example, we don't know what quantum computers will do in the future. Maybe they will be able to break some of the PQC algorithms. Quantum key distribution has an advantage that we know, as much as we can know, that it will be immune against quantum attacks. But it has other disadvantages, like Ali said. So we really need to look into a case-by-case scenario, and then decide, look at the disadvantages and the advantages of the different solutions and choose the right ones. Maybe, in a hybrid mode, combinations of different ones. So it's not the one or the other. You need to go a little bit deeper. And also in quantum key distribution, there are advances. Ali talked about being device dependent. There are also advances in that. There are also QKD schemes that are device independent. So it's all very dynamic. And I think it all boils down to the concept of crypto agility. And quantum risk is a very unfortunate consequence of quantum computers, but I think it's doing one very good thing, and that is creating awareness. And we don't know what the future is going to bring us, but people are starting to understand that things are dynamic. Cryptography has been very rigid in the past, and we realize now that we need crypto agility. We need to be prepared for the future, not knowing what the future is going to be. So again, the concept of crypto agility is really central here.
Thanks, Itan. That's very clear. And Peter, and then I think Lily as well. You both wanted to come in.
Yeah, that was some brilliant points there, and a couple things really quickly. So yeah, layered security is one of the fundamental operating principles of information security, right? So containment of what we call the blast radius. So increasingly sophisticated layers of security has traditionally proven to be very effective against cyber attacks. In addition to that, one way to think about quantum key distribution is more or less to prevent or to have intelligence on eavesdroppers, right, on the line. So your keys are only as secure as secure as your line for exchanging the keys, right? If you can't compromise the keys, then there's an additional layer of security. So quantum key distribution is in effect a way to ensure that there's not somebody listening on the line who's then, gathering some of your data. And one final point, there are some interesting experiments in science being done using quantum technology or quantum mechanical technology for authentication mechanisms, as well as enhancing randomness or entropy to help increase the robustness of symmetrical keys, which is really outside the conversation that we've been focused on. But there's a lot of developments that are still emerging in this field.
And Lily, I think you wanted to add something too.
Yes, and actually, between I raised my hand and then a lot of things I want to raise already covered by Peter. So I think the people probably do not have to choose one from another in some stage, because remember today we are dealing too many communications in the internet environment. So some pairs may have the QKD available and some pairs may not. So we can combine them together. So for the PQC key establishment, you have authentication, you establish key, but you also can include the key from QKD, make a combination of that and to share a common key or multiple common keys. So so my point is that people may not need to choose. However, PQC is kind of drop-in replacement for every kind of pairs of the communication parties. Today, they use public key cryptography. So we need a PQC for that place.
Thanks, Lily. So the future is probably hybrid. And Itan, I think you wanted to come back, and then I'd like to get one more question in before we finish. So, but please go ahead.
Yeah, one more aspect that is really interesting. There is also an aspect of how long is it going to take for a quantum computer to break a specific key. There is a lot of interesting research being done on this, and the last word has not been said. The question is it going to take a millisecond, an hour, or 10 days? So, for example, when we're using digital certificates, digital certificates that we use for browsing the internet are usually valid for 3 years. If we know that quantum computers are definitely going to take more than a day to break such a certificate, then we can refresh them, let's say, on an hourly basis. There are ways, very interesting ways, and I'm not sure whether that's going to work. And quantum computers might eventually be so fast that it's not going to be relevant. But there are some use cases that we might not have to necessarily drop RSA and elliptic curves completely, or at least as a first stage when quantum computers become closer to break cryptography. Then there are some things that we can do in order to extend the lifetime of these algorithms and give us time to see where this is heading. There are interesting examples on blockchain. In blockchain, it's really important how long it takes for a quantum computer to actually break a key. So it's really important to take it as a case by case and understand the threats, and then decide on mitigation measures. So I'm repeating that every time. It's really important. It's not like a quantum computer comes, shows the algorithm, everything breaks, we have to replace everything. It's much more nuanced than that.
So thanks, Itan. In fact, I'm going to follow up on that point about nuance by saying, this is a fascinating conversation, and it happens right at the sort of edge of theoretical mathematics and engineering and so on. What I'd like to do now is that annoying journalistic thing where I'm going to bring it right back to sort of practical advice. And what I'd like from each of you, if you can, in about 30 seconds, if you could just have the attendees take away one message from this panel and from this event generally about what they need to do about this and how they should worry about it. What would it be? And I think if we go in reverse alphabetical order this time, so Ali, I might put you on the spot, I'm afraid, and start with you.
Yeah, I mean it's simple. Follow the standards. That's my advice. There are cryptographic standards that are about to be out now and about to be formalized in a year or two. And NIST has been putting out a lot of documents on how to migrate to post-quantum cryptography, how to build a roadmap, to understand your crypto infrastructure, what you need to change, etc. There are lots of discussions around alternatives like QKD and others, but there is an immediate thing that all companies need to do, is that they need to put a transition roadmap to move from elliptic curve cryptography, RSA, to post-quantum cryptography. And I'd like to disagree with Itan and say that do not play the game of saying how fast it's going to be to break RSA and let's extend RSA for 9 months and a half. I think that this should be done once and for all, and move to the new standard.
So follow the standards. I guess, Lily, that would be something you'd agree with.
Yes, sure. That's Ali already covered what I want to say. And one thing I want to mention, because for the first generation of the public key cryptography standards like RSA and Diffie-Hellman and elliptic curve cryptography, it took many years for us to get everything right. And today, of course, we have a more solid foundation for the new crypto systems. However, still, the migration and the transition is going to be a long journey, and we need to start and prepare.
So the best time to start is now. And Peter, could I turn to you then?
Sure. A lot of great things here already. I would underline that the time to start is now. Spend time discovering, analyzing, prioritizing where you should focus your energies, and consider a layered, um, complex approach, right? Consider the right solution for the right situation, not one size fits all.
That's very clear. Thanks. So not one size fits all. And Itan, what would you like people to take away from this?
So a lot of good things have been said so far, so I won't repeat that. I would emphasize that, and I'm talking to business owners and large corporations. It's not just a technical issue, just the migration to a new standard. That's one thing, but get things organized. Try to, from the governance perspective, try to understand how you undergo such a transition. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by how complex this is going to be.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So it's as I said, it's a massive topic that we've only sort of scratched the surface of. But I'd like to thank the panelists very much, and thank you for tuning in. And please do stay tuned for the rest of the event. Thank you very much.